The air in the space market was thick with dust, the low hum of distant engines mingling with the shouts of vendors. Stalls lined the walls, each filled with strange, colorful objects and various species from all corners of the galaxy. But in the center of it all, there was a dark corner, hidden from the bright lights of the bustling market, where the most dangerous deals were made. In that corner, a group of humans, barely more than children, stood shackled, their heads bowed. The auctioneer, a gruff alien with green scales and yellow eyes, looked out at the crowd, his voice echoing through the air as he called for bids. "Slaves from Earth," he shouted, gesturing toward the row of young humans, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. Strong, obedient, ready to work. The best labor force the galaxy has seen. Among them was Eli, a young man barely in his 20s. His dark brown hair was matted with sweat, his clothes ragged. He had been born into a world of hardship, and this was just another step in his struggle to survive. But his fate, like that of the others, seemed sealed. Eli stood at the back of the line, trying to shrink into the shadows, hoping he might somehow be overlooked. His heart raced. He had seen this before, watched as other humans were sold to the highest bidder. Each time, it was a new nightmare. But this time, something felt different. Across the room, a figure emerged from the crowd. The alien queen, Zariah, stood tall and proud. Her long, silver hair shimmered under the lights, and her violet skin seemed to glow as she moved. Her armor, adorned with intricate patterns, suggested power and elegance in equal measure. The other bidders stepped aside as she approached, her presence commanding respect. Eli watched her from the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard of Zariah before. A ruler of great wealth and power, she was known for her shrewd decisions and calculated risks. She had the reputation of taking those she wanted for herself, rarely showing kindness. "How much for this one?" Zariah's voice was smooth, her tone not cold, but calculating. She pointed directly at Eli. The auctioneer, surprised by her attention, quickly checked Eli's condition before setting a price. "This one is strong, but he's younger than most, priced low at 5,000 credits." Zariah raised an eyebrow, considering the offer. "I'll take him. All of them, in fact." She gestured toward the entire line of humans. "Bring them to me." The auctioneer nodded quickly. "Of course, Your Majesty." As Eli was pulled from the group, he was too stunned to resist. His heart hammered in his chest, and his mind raced. The queen had bought him. She hadn't just purchased one of the slaves, she had bought them all. But what did she want with him? Zariah's eyes locked onto his as he was led toward her. She studied him, her gaze intense but not unkind. There was something in her eyes, a curiosity he couldn't place. "You are free now," she said softly, her voice surprisingly gentle, "but not in the way you think." Eli couldn't speak. His world had just shifted in a way he couldn't understand. Eli was led away from the market, still in a daze. His mind was clouded, his body numb. He had been bought, by a queen, no less. The thought echoed in his head like a dream he couldn't wake up from. As he was escorted down narrow hallways and through massive, ornate doors, he couldn't help but look back at the bustling marketplace. It seemed so far away, like a life he had left behind. They finally stopped in front of a large, gleaming chamber. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a room bathed in soft, violet light. The walls were lined with golden tapestries, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and spices. A large window showed the vastness of space, stars twinkling in the distance. Inside, a guard ordered, giving Eli a push. He stepped into the room and froze. Queen Zariah stood near a large, luxurious desk, watching him with those intense violet eyes. Her beauty was unlike anything Eli had ever seen. Otherworldly, powerful, and yet there was a softness in her gaze. "Come closer," Zariah said, her voice calm and inviting. Eli hesitated. His entire life had been spent running or hiding from people like her, people with power who could control his fate in an instant. And yet, something about Soraya made him feel like he could trust her. Slowly, he took a step forward. "What do you want with me?" he asked, his voice shaky. Soraya smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You are no longer a slave, Eli." Eli flinched at the sound of his name. He had always been just another number, another piece of property in the markets, but hearing it from her felt different. It was almost like she saw him. "I don't understand," he said, his voice quiet. "I was sold. I'm just a slave, a thing to be used." Zoraya's smile faded, her expression becoming more serious. "That's what they told you. But you're more than that. You are worth more than any price they put on your head." She stepped closer to him, her footsteps silent. "I saw your potential, Eli. I've seen too many lives wasted for the sake of profit. It ends now." Eli didn't know what to say. He looked down at the floor, his hands trembling. He had been so used to surviving, to fighting for every scrap of dignity he could hold on to. But in this moment, he realized that there was no fight left. He was no longer a slave. Soraya continued, her voice softer. "You are free to choose now. You may stay here in the palace. Live without fear. I will give you a life you never thought possible." Eli raised his head, his eyes searching hers. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Soraya paused, her expression unreadable for a moment. "Because everyone deserves a chance to live for themselves." She stepped back, turning toward a soft seat by the window. "You will have a place here, Eli. A new life. You may take it, or you may leave." Eli's heart raced. His entire world had just shifted. The choices he had always known, survival, escape, being nothing but a tool, suddenly felt distant. He was free. Free to choose what came next. He looked back at Soraya, who watched him patiently, waiting. Finally, Eli spoke. "I don't know how to live like that." Soraya smiled again. "I will help you learn." Eli stood in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of her words. He had been given a choice, a future. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a thing. He felt like a person. The next few days passed in a blur. Eli found himself adjusting to life in Zoraya's palace, though it wasn't easy. The luxury around him was overwhelming. Soft beds, fresh food, and rooms filled with art and books he had never dreamed of. He felt like an intruder in a world that didn't belong to him. Soraya didn't push him, allowing him time to settle. But she had made it clear he was free. Free to do what he wanted, free to choose his future. Yet every time he tried to step outside the confines of his old life, doubts crept in. One afternoon, he found himself alone in one of the palace's expansive gardens. The flowers here were unlike any he had seen before, glowing softly under the light of distant stars. A breeze stirred the leaves, and Eli breathed in deeply, the scent of the alien plants calming his mind. It was peaceful here, but the quiet also brought a sense of unease. "You seem lost," a voice said from behind him. Eli turned to find Soraya standing a few feet away, her silver hair shimmering like starlight in the soft glow. Her presence was calming, but Eli still wasn't sure how to act around her. She was the queen, after all, powerful and beyond anything he could understand. I guess I'm still figuring it out," Eli said quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. Soraya smiled gently and stepped closer. "There is no rush. You have time. You're free, Eli." "I know," he replied, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "It's just hard to believe. I've been a slave my whole life. Now I'm supposed to be, what? A citizen. A free man." He shook his head. "I don't even know where to start." Soraya's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her voice kind but firm. "It's okay to feel lost. This is a new beginning for you, but remember, you're not alone. I'll be here to guide you, if you need it." Eli didn't know why, but the words she spoke felt sincere. There was something about her that made him want to trust her. Maybe it was the way she had treated him, like he mattered, like he wasn't just another slave to be discarded. In this palace, he was seen as something more. "I've never had anyone look out for me like that," Eli admitted, his voice quiet. "It feels strange." Zaraya smiled, her golden eyes gleaming. "You deserve it, Eli. Every person does, even those who have been forgotten. I see something in you, something worth protecting." Eli looked down at his hands, still not used to the feeling of being cared for. He had always had to fight for everything: his survival, his dignity, his freedom. Now that fight seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," Zaraya said, her tone soft but confident. "But I promise you this: I will help you find your way." Eli finally looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet assurance that made him feel like he was standing on solid ground for the first time in his life. "I want to learn," he said, his voice stronger now. "I don't know where to start, but I'll figure it out." Zaraya nodded, her smile widening. "Good. We'll start together." As Eli stood there, the weight of the past lifted just a little, replaced by the warmth of something new. A new life. A new beginning. The days blurred together as Eli adjusted to life in the palace. Zaraya was patient with him, offering him space when he needed it, but always present when he had questions. She had kept her word. She treated him with kindness, with respect. But even so, Eli struggled to accept it. He spent most of his days wandering the palace, exploring the gardens and vast halls. Everything was different here. The food, the comfort, the art. Things he never thought he would experience, much less have access to freely. One afternoon, as he sat near the grand balcony overlooking the gardens, Zaraya joined him. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange. Eli couldn't help but admire the view. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had seen before. "You like it?" Zaraya asked, sitting down beside him. "It's incredible," Eli replied, his voice filled with awe. "I never thought I'd see anything like this." Zaraya smiled, her eyes gleaming with warmth. "There's much more to see, Eli. You're free to explore and learn. You're no longer bound by your past." Eli nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always been tied to a life of survival, constantly fighting to stay alive, to earn what little he had. The idea of being free, truly free, felt foreign to him. He had no idea what to do with it. "I've been thinking about that," he said, turning to face her. "I don't know what to do with all this. It's so different. I've never had a choice before." Zaraya's expression softened. "You don't have to have it all figured out right away. Take your time. The freedom to choose is yours, Eli. You don't have to live for anyone else anymore. You're your own person." Eli looked at her, his eyes searching hers for the truth. He had been told all his life that his worth was determined by his labor, by his ability to serve. But here, with Zaraya, it felt like he was being given something far more valuable: his life, his choices, his future. "But what do I do?" Eli asked quietly. "I'm used to being told what to do. How do I even start living for myself?" Zaraya reached out and placed a hand gently on his shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "Start by asking yourself what you want. It's not about what you've done in the past. It's about what you want now. You're free to discover that. And you don't have to do it alone." Eli was silent for a moment, processing her words. He had spent so long just surviving, doing whatever it took to get by. But now, for the first time, he was given the chance to truly live, to make his own choices. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew that for once, he had the freedom to try. "Maybe I'll start with learning," he said slowly. "I've always wanted to know more. About the stars, about other worlds. But I never had the time." Zaraya nodded approvingly. "Then that's a good place to begin. There is a library here, full of knowledge from every corner of the galaxy. You can start there. Learn what you want, when you want." Eli smiled, a small but genuine smile. For the first time in his life, he felt hope. Hope for the future. The weeks passed, and Eli slowly found himself settling into the palace's rhythm. He spent most of his time in the Grand Library, surrounded by ancient texts and holographic displays. The knowledge was vast, galaxies of information on every subject imaginable. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just working to survive. He was learning, growing. Zariah often visited him in the library, quietly watching him as he read or listened to holograms explaining the complexities of different civilizations. She never pressured him, always offering him a quiet space to think, and occasionally guiding him through the more complicated texts. "You're picking this up quickly," she remarked one afternoon, observing as Eli focused on a holographic map of the galaxy. "Not many humans can grasp this level of understanding so fast." Eli glanced up, wiping his brow. He had been studying for hours. "I've always wanted to know more. But I was never allowed to, never had the chance. This," he waved his hand around the library, "this is more than I ever dreamed of." Zariah smiled, her violet eyes softening. "You deserve it, Eli. No one should have their life dictated by circumstances beyond their control." Eli nodded but didn't say anything. He wasn't sure how to put into words how he felt. His whole life had been spent as property, doing what was asked of him with no real choices. But now, here he was, in a place where he had endless possibilities. It felt overwhelming at times, but also exhilarating. One afternoon, as he walked through the palace's gardens, something inside him began to shift. The air felt different, lighter, as if something had finally clicked. He was free, truly free. There was no one telling him what to do or where to go. He had the power to choose his path. As Eli approached a small fountain, Zariah appeared beside him. She had been watching him from a distance, and now she moved closer, a look of understanding in her eyes. "Have you made a decision?" she asked softly. Eli took a deep breath, looking out at the water as it flowed calmly through the fountain's stone basin. "I think I've figured out what I want to do," he said slowly, turning to her. "I want to explore, not just the galaxy, but who I am. I've spent so much of my life surviving that I never had the chance to truly live." Zariah nodded, her expression gentle. "I'm glad to hear that. You've earned the right to live for yourself, Eli, to make your own choices." Eli smiled, the weight of her words lifting from his shoulders. He had never known such peace. The future was no longer a burden to carry, but something to look forward to. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Zariah placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes meeting his. "You don't need to thank me. This is your life now. I only offered you the chance. What you make of it is up to you." Eli's heart swelled with something he couldn't quite name. Freedom, perhaps, or maybe hope. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged. Days turned into weeks, and Eli's life in the palace became more comfortable, yet his mind was still restless. He had spent years simply surviving, fighting for his place in a world that never saw his worth. But now, surrounded by comfort and opportunity, he wasn't sure where to begin. He wanted to learn, to explore, but his past, the scars of slavery, kept him from fully embracing the freedom he had been given. One morning, as the sun filtered through the high windows of the palace, Eli found himself walking alone through the gardens. The flowers here were unlike anything he had seen before, alien blooms with colors so vibrant they seemed to glow. But it wasn't the flowers that caught his attention. It was the stillness. The soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of palace activity were the only sounds. He felt both at peace and unsure. He stopped by a small reflective pond at the center of the garden. His reflection looked back at him, but it wasn't just his face he saw. It was the young man he had been before, the one who had endured so much just to survive. That version of himself seemed so far away, like a distant memory he could hardly grasp. "Are you lost again?" a familiar voice asked softly. Eli turned to see Zariah approaching, her silver hair glinting in the morning light. She had a way of appearing without making a sound, always calm and graceful. Eli smiled weakly. "Maybe," he said, looking down at the water. "I'm not sure what to do with all this freedom." Zariah stepped closer, her eyes thoughtful. "You have the rest of your life ahead of you. There's no need to rush." "I know," Eli replied, his voice uncertain. "But I've been living in survival mode for so long. I don't know how to live without it. I'm not sure who I am without the fight." Zariah watched him quietly for a moment. "I understand more than you think. We all carry our past with us, whether we want to or not. But that doesn't define you, Eli. It's just a part of you. What you choose to do now, that's what matters." Eli looked up at her, his golden brown eyes searching her face. "How did you get past it? Your past, I mean." Zariah smiled faintly, her expression softening. "I didn't get past it. I learned to live with it. My past is a part of me, but it doesn't control me. I make my own choices now. And you, Eli, are free to make yours. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Her words sank in, and for the first time, Eli felt a small shift inside himself. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was alive, with a chance to shape his future. I think I want to start with something simple," Eli said, his voice growing steadier. "I want to see more of the galaxy. I've never left Earth, never had the chance to explore." Zariah's smile widened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then that's where we'll begin. I'll help you see everything you've dreamed of, and more." Eli felt a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. The unknown no longer seemed frightening. For the first time in his life, he wasn't being forced into a path. He was choosing it for himself. "Thank you," he said quietly. Zariah's eyes gleamed with pride. "You deserve it, Eli. You always have." As they stood together in the peaceful garden, Eli realized that his past might always be a part of him, but his future was his own to create. And that, for the first time, gave him hope. The stars shone brightly over the palace as Eli stood on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against his face. He had spent so much of his life trapped in the chaos of survival, and now, for the first time, he felt a sense of calm that he couldn't quite explain. The peace of the palace had become a new kind of home for him, one that he was slowly learning to embrace. Behind him, he could hear the soft footfalls of Zariah approaching. Her presence had become a steady comfort, though he had long stopped feeling like a slave around her. She was no longer just the powerful queen who had bought him from the markets. She was someone he had come to trust, someone who had given him a chance at a life he never thought possible. "I see you found the stars," Zariah said, her voice gentle. Eli smiled faintly, his eyes still fixed on the sky. "They're beautiful. I never thought I'd be able to just look at them like this. Back on Earth, I was always too busy trying to survive." Zariah stepped up beside him, her violet eyes following his gaze. "Now you have time to dream, Eli. The universe is vast, and there's so much to see." Eli took a deep breath, his mind wandering to all the things he wanted to experience, places he had only read about in books, worlds he had only imagined. The freedom to choose what he wanted to do, the freedom to live, was a gift he never thought he would have. "I've been thinking a lot," Eli said, his voice low, "about what comes next. I don't want to waste this second chance. I want to see the galaxy, to learn about the cultures and civilizations that exist beyond Earth." Zariah looked at him, her eyes filled with something like pride. "That is a good choice. You have the freedom to choose whatever path you wish, and I will be here to support you every step of the way." Eli turned to face her, the weight of his gratitude pressing in on him. "I don't know what to say. You've given me everything. Things I never thought I could have. A chance at a real life." Zariah placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm yet warm. "You've earned it, Eli. You have a future now. You've fought through your past, and now you can choose what happens next." Eli nodded slowly, his chest tightening with emotion. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in his life, he had a place, a purpose, and a choice. "I think I'm ready," Eli said, his voice steady. "To live, to choose my own future." Soraya smiled, her eyes softening. "Then let us begin this journey, Eli. There is much to explore, and you don't have to do it alone." Together, they stood on the balcony, looking out into the vastness of space. Eli knew that whatever came next, he was ready. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was living.